This podcast contains some strong language and some stories involving violence. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Warfighters United, where veterans' voices are heard and transitional resources and programs provided. This podcast is brought to you by the VFW, a service organization that provides our service members and veterans resources and representation throughout the nation. They also enhance the community support and the camaraderie we all miss being in the military. So join the VFW today and make a difference. Today I have a guest with me in studio, Mr. Derek Blumke, a Gruntstyle Foundation Veteran Impact Fellow. He works to implement safer psychiatric medication prescribing. In 2008, he co-founded the Student Veterans of America at the University of Michigan. He served as a founding director of the Department of Veterans Affairs National Mental Health Program, VITAL. And he also served as the Chief Operations Officer Manager for the VFW Department of Michigan. Spent 12 years in the Air Force and in the Michigan Air National Guard. Deployed 2 times, one to Uzbekistan and Afghanistan in 2005. He actually controlled some AC-130 gunships. Leads Gruntstyle Foundation's education campaign in overprescribing and harm production of all the medications that the VAs gives our guys after they come back. So, Derek, welcome to Warfighters United.
Thanks for having me, Eric. How are you doing?
Oh, not too bad. We were just talking a minute ago, but before we get into that, I kind of want to hear about your military service. So you did some stuff with the gunships. What was that like?
I did not control them. I fixed them. I was an aircraft electrician and maintenance supervisor with Spectre gunships from 1999, 2000 to 2005. Did 2 trips to Uzbekistan, 3rd to Afghanistan, and got to support those on the ground in our special operations community to keeping them alive and helping them fight. So,
and what was that like?
As a 20-year-old child arriving in Uzbekistan, it was bizarre. Learning the responsibility that we had. The first time I really understood the gravity of what I was into was had a pilot come up to me as I was struggling to get a part installed, and he said that if we don't get the plane off the ground in the next 5 minutes, we've got a SEAL team downrange that may not make it out. And that was the first time that the really gravity of what we were doing really started to land on our shoulders and realize we have lives at stake. And so it was pretty wild, pretty proud. When you talk about the gunships, AC-130s, you don't meet a whole lot of infantry types, special forces types that don't just like stop and just say, dude, you saved my life.
Right.
And I've had Vietnam vets say the same thing. I'm like, I wasn't born yet, but Reinhold sure did. Reinhold was state commander of the VFW, Reinhold Janka. He and I worked on the same exact tail numbers.
Really?
30, 40 years apart. He was in Cambodia, I believe, in Laos, and I was in Afghanistan, Uzbekistan. And so same exact airplanes he and I both worked on decades apart.
And that just goes to show you that we use our weaponry for many, many years. We use our gunships. We use our planes. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of the Hueys that we would fly over in were also from Vietnam. So we make our military supplies last for long years till we decide to replace them.
Sure do.
And so now you got a bigger fight on your hands. You know, we're talking about overprescribing medications by the VA, especially psychotropics and that sort of thing. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I accidentally found my way into this, and my friend Kim Witzak says she's an accidental advocate, and I think most of us would say that we didn't necessarily plan to find ourselves advocating or fighting on a given issue. Something impacted us, something happened in our lives that drove us in this direction, and what drove me in this direction is I was in New York City. I'd recently finished up a couple of years earlier running a national mental health program for the VA. Coming fresh off the heels of building and running SVA, Student Veterans America, and I had been taking some college classes and was also starting a technology company at the same time. Realized that, hey, maybe I do have an ADD issue that they talked about when I was a kid, and went in and got re-diagnosed, prescribed Adderall. Not long after, was prescribed Ambien, gabapentin after that for anxiety, a couple of other meds. At certain points, I was on 6 medications at a time. My company fell apart, relationships fell apart. A friend of mine packed me up and hauled me back to Michigan in a U-Haul. And I spent the next year and a half bouncing around between crappy Airbnb and hotel and friends' couches and floors as I kind of try to sort my life back out. And the end of the day, what I realized is the medications and the treatment that I was getting was actually harming me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, that story is all too common, myself included. At one point in time, about 8 or 9 years ago, I was on 10 to 12 different medications. A lot of the medications you just said, Wellbutrin, hydroxyzine, prazosin, Seroquel, which is a deadly killer. That was probably the worst one for me. You feel like you're a zombie all the time. And when I hit my low point, I was thinking about taking a bullet to my head. And luckily, I got some help. I went down to the Battle Creek VA. And of course, they don't accept service dogs in the inpatient, which they need to change. So I wouldn't go. And thank God for the Semper Fi Fund. They sent me down to Florida, and I did a month inpatient with my service dog, and it probably changed my life. And that's an all too common story. And when they saw the medications I was on, they were even dumbfounded why I was on them. Along with being misdiagnosed with TBI, the same thing with some of those medications have some horrible effects with guys who have TBI. And if you're from the era of 2001 to 2007 or 8, when TBI became on the spectrum, there's about 6 or 7 years of veterans that when we got out, if we weren't bleeding, we weren't going anywhere. And so what happened was they were never diagnosed. And I believe that that's a part of the suicidal ideations that a lot of us had back then, is because of undiagnosed issues. And then when the VA, you go see them, they start throwing medications at you. And next thing you know, that's interacting with your brain housing group, your synapses. And next thing you know, you just feel like you're a loss. Mm-hmm. And people are better out without you. And I'm here to tell you that's a complete wrong way to think. But I've been there, and I've made it through the dark side and ended up on the light. But now we need to, put this education out there. Yeah. And so
what you mentioned right there, you mentioned one of the medications that you were prescribed. 10 to 12 medications at the same time. There is no science behind that. There's never been any science done on safety of drug interactions between 6, 5, 10, 12, 15 different drugs. So the idea that this is okay is just insane and absurd. And I think most people listening to this would agree. But you were prescribed Wellbutrin, and you mentioned you had a TBI. They're not supposed to prescribe Wellbutrin to individuals with TBIs. Like, this is contraindicated. They've got studies showing this is dangerous. And this actually resulted in the death of a friend of mine's son, Connor Brumfield, 22 years old, was prescribed Wellbutrin, had a mild TBI, 8 pills, and 8 days later, this young man killed himself. And unnecessary, because we know that drug shouldn't have been prescribed in the first place, but we also know that him, and along with many others, had not been warned of the risk profiles of these medications, especially antidepressants, and especially for young people and young men between the ages of 18 and 24, which that young man was. And here we are staring down the face of the greatest suicide epidemic our community's ever seen, and suicide rates keep going up, especially for that young group. And so we should not be shocked to see what we're seeing today.
Yeah, and you were just showing me on a chart, and I didn't know this because we do the 22 push-ups a day here at Q106. Every November, we go to 22 places, and over this last year, they've said it went down to 17. But you were showing me that's not the case depending on the age group. And so maybe you could explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, so what we've been told is that the suicide numbers have gone down. And so years ago, we've got the 22 a day, basically branding and marketing campaigns that were really going on. And as a community, we all bought into it. Because we care about each other and we want the best for each other, and we don't want these tragedies to continue to occur. And so what we ultimately had was suicide rates continue to increase, which is what you really need to be looking at is the rates. But during that time, they also started pulling apart that 22 number by group. And so initially they didn't including active duty and reserves and guard, and they pulled those out, and they had another group, they pulled those out, and so magically the 22 starts shrinking down to 19, 18, now 17 is what they say, But when you start looking at deaths of undetermined intent, single car accidents at 100 miles an hour, for example, overdoses that you can't totally prove that it was a suicide because there's no note. But we're starting to hear the numbers are actually in the area of like 40, 44, maybe more. And so the numbers have not gone down, they've gone up. We've just been told that they've been going down because we looked at the numbers differently.
The bureaucracy of how people look at things can really change the outcome and what it actually is.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these folks are well-meaning. I don't think this is a malicious campaign to cause as many suicides and harm to as many families as possible. But I think it's what we have is just a lot of people who are so steeped in this belief that we're doing the right things and these outreach campaigns are working, when in reality, you start looking at the number of folks we're bringing into the system, you start looking at the outcomes, you start realizing that maybe it's because of our outreach campaigns, because we're putting more people into a system that's broken right now, that first approach is medication, medication, medication. Most of these medications have warnings of suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Maybe it's us. Maybe it's like the accidental advocates of the world. We've been trying to help and trying to fight and trying to bring more of our friends in to get the help that they need. And maybe at certain times we've been bringing them into the wrong places and the system is not set up to do what they need, which is for people like you. You responded well to a service animal. And right now I just watched the testimony of a couple of VA mental health leaders to Congress about 3 weeks ago. And I watched as Morgan Luttrell, Congressman Luttrell from Texas, asked about service animals, and they said that, well, we're not doing that because we have a study that shows that does not work. And Congressman Luttrell says, a study, a single study.
That's insane.
Insane. But like, talk to the vets that got a service dog. You're going to hear that this saved my life.
Oh, over and over again. I can tell you my dogs over the last 15 years has done more to save my life than any kind of medication I've ever been on. Mm-hmm. My family has made me a better father. It's made me a better husband, and also, my service dogs don't only service me. They service my family as well. And 68% of households have a dog of some sort. And so only about 10% of Americans need an ADA service dog, which is, last week I was doing SierraDelta.com. My buddy BJ, he runs this program to where he facilitates help for that 68% of people, or that 90% of people that don't need a service dog, but they want their dog to be trained to help them. And so he provides grants for that kind of stuff. And I think that there needs to be more focus on the other 90% that don't need one, to give them the added help to move forward. Mm-hmm. But we were talking about calls of action, and you were talking about some of the things that you guys want the VA to do as they prescribe medications. And so I was watching some videos, and you guys were talking about a signed consent form. Mm-hmm. Most things that you do, any procedure that you do at the VA, they have you sign a consent form to be able to allow them to facilitate help. Now, why don't they do that with the medications they prescribe you?
It's a funny question. And so the calls to action are not coming from just one group. And so I work for the Gruntstyle Foundation full time. So the apparel brand that I think many of us in our community will recognize, with our 2 cross muskets on the sleeves. I work for the nonprofit arm of that, and my sole work is solely focused on this issue of overprescribing and the role of these medications and harm. Because right now we've got about 70% of all veterans under VA care on a psychiatric drug, 30% on antidepressants. We've got box warnings from the FDA, warning of suicidal thoughts and behaviors, especially of young people. And we continue to see the increasing suicide rates, especially of that youngest age group, 18 to 34-year-olds. And so it should be zero surprise that we're having the outcomes that we're having. A large chunk of this problem is not coming from that all drugs are bad. The problem is coming from our doctors don't know how dangerous many of these medications can be, and patients are not being told of the risk profiles and side effects of these drugs. And so what we're talking about, and this is being supported by 17 national organizations across the country, to include the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the Gruntstyle Foundation, who we recently partnered with over the past 6 months to really lead the charge on these conversations and push reform to make sure that we don't have more of our friends continue to die every day. Instead, we're seeing better outcomes, happier families, and families that stay together and hold together through their traumas and through their tough times, instead of having the outcomes that we're seeing. And so what we're really calling for, this signatory informed consent or written consent, is the same thing as you mentioned. Anytime you have a procedure, you have to sign a form saying, I understand the risks of this procedure, I understand the benefits, I understand there's alternative treatments that I could choose, but I choose this treatment. And so in 2020, former VA Secretary Shulkin, he actually implemented a policy VA-wide that calls for written consent for veterans with long-term opiate use. And this policy is in place at the VA right now. And so any veteran who is at the VA being treated at the VHA for their care and is being prescribed an opiate for long-term use, they have to sign, just like you would before a surgery, a colonoscopy, whatever it may be. They have to sign understanding that this medication can have this outcome. It can have risk of addiction and dependency, and have risk of overdose and all these things, right? That's what the calls to action that we're really going for are: safer, smarter prescribing. And this call to action, written consent, would be expanded to psychiatric drugs, antidepressants, antipsychotics, Seroquel, as you mentioned, benzodiazepines, which are anxiolytics, or they call them sedatives and sometimes. But pretty much any psychotropic medication that's out there, you should be receiving a conversation with your doctor. You should have a real conversation of, hey, this medication can result in persistent sexual dysfunction and in some people permanent. So we know that there's a risk profile of, when you start an antidepressant, that some people, the numbers are actually around 50%, have sexual dysfunction while on antidepressants, specifically SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. What they're not told, and what the drug companies and the FDA has known for years, is that some people, this is a permanent condition. It doesn't stop when you stop taking the drug. For some, it's a total loss of libido, total loss of sexual function entirely. If there's a risk of that, patients should be warned of that. If there's a risk that this drug could make me kill myself or hurt myself or someone else, I think the family and the individual also deserves to know that. And right now, the problem we have is doctors don't even know. As we talked about earlier, I went to a VA clinic, the Lansing VA clinic, about a month and a half ago, and I received great treatment. They actually, it was one of the best experiences I've had in the VA my entire time of going to the VA, well over a decade. And even still, the psychiatrist that I sat down with, she wanted to prescribe me an antidepressant, and I told her that I had a horrific year-long withdrawal from Zoloft. I was only on Zoloft for a year, but it took me a year to get off of it, and I was having to shave the pills down, little granules off, like I was a drug addict, trying to get off of this stuff. And it was because my body had become dependent on it. It wasn't like there's addiction and dependency. Addiction is the rat wants to push the button in the science experiment because the button produces cocaine, and cocaine is fun. And so the rat wants to keep pushing that button. And there's a dependency with that too. But dependency with antidepressants is you're on these medications. It just kind of numbs you, but it takes a while. And so it's not like a high that you get.
No.
It's not like, geez, I can't wait to take my Zoloft and I'm going to have so much fun. There's none of that.
No, not at all. In fact, you dread that morning wake up when you have that handful of pills and you're like, how am I going to swallow all these?
Yeah.
Well,
until you don't have it and you're going through acute withdrawal and you feels like bolts of lightning are hitting you in the head.
Yes.
And black blips of time are vanishing. Stop me when any of this doesn't sound familiar.
Yeah, right. It
room
does.
Is spinning.
Well,
vertigo, dizziness, nausea, almost puking.
Yeah, when I was down and I got to the inpatient ward down in Florida, the same thing happened to me. In fact, it was funny. There was a 3-day time period that I don't have any recollection of. And when I came out of my stupor, they wouldn't allow us to smoke all the time or anything. We had to, we're in locked doors. And we were about to go outside, and they wouldn't let me outside. And apparently I took a cigarette, and I ate it. And I said, I'm going to get my nicotine whether you like it or not. They told me about that afterwards. I had no idea. When I woke up, I had a haircut. And I was like, when did I get this? And there was like 2 days ago. And I was like, I had no idea. And so there's a 3-day blackout because they were taking me off some medications, finding out what medications they needed to keep me on. And it took about a week for this process. And that was the whole first week of me being in that inpatient ward. But imagine doing that without being in an inpatient ward and trying to do it yourself.
Well, no, it's terrible. Is the inpatient wards can be the worst. The one of our greatest challenges right now is inpatient care with mental health, because the first thing that happens is you go in and say you're having panic attacks. You have a lot of work stress, or you have a loss in your life, or you have severe trauma from active duty, or you're a civilian and you're just getting a car accident and got PTSD from that, whatever it may be, right? The first thing that they do is drug you. And you don't walk out of inpatient care, and I'd say probably 90+% of the cases, without a bag of pills.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And so what you just mentioned, you're going in there for, say, a week, right? And you've been on the medications you're already on for 6 months, for example, or years. Or,
yeah. No, mine was years.
Months. Yeah. Well, they're switching those medications out. They're not all one for one. So what they actually are doing is putting you through psychiatric drug withdrawal as they're playing a game of whack-a-mole with which medication we think might work best. And so, there's no science behind a lot of this. Right now, the guidelines call for 50% reductions over the course of several weeks. So say if you're on an antidepressant for a long period of time, your doctor might say, oh, just cut this in half for a few weeks, cut it in half, cut that in half for another few weeks, and you should be fine to stop it. For some people, that is the worst possible thing that you can do, because you can cause permanent harm to yourself because of the way that you're titrating off of these medications.
And so what is a good way, if you're that veteran out there, mm-hmm. or you're that service member and you're realizing that you're on all these pills, what does a person like that do to try to help himself ensure that doesn't happen to him?
Well, I'd say the number one rule is, and this is a campaign we're looking to launch, because I'm fortunate to be able to sit in a variety of different roles. One of the Gruntstyle Foundation, another is a legislative director, along with my friend Scott Taylor for the VFW Department of Michigan. And then also I chair a subgroup of the Michigan Governor's Challenge, which is a national initiative from the White House calling on governors and mayors across the country to work with the VA and SAMHSA to help reduce veteran suicides. And so talking about what to do, we're actually talking about doing a campaign across the state of Michigan, Do Not Stop Taking Your Pills campaign. Because the first thing people hear is they hear, holy crap, I did not know this about that medication that I'm on. Or they hear a drug and they start researching and say, wait a minute, I think I'm on that one, is how that'll go. And then they realize, wait a minute, I didn't know it caused this. And they'll stop. And like you and I talked about, if you've been on one of these drugs for a long period of time, or even a couple months, for some people, that is the worst thing you can absolutely do, is cold turkey yourself off of a psychiatric drug.
Yeah, it's not like smoking.
No. I mean, smoking would be unpleasant.
Yes, it would be unpleasant, but it ain't going to kill you.
No, this can kill you. This can absolutely kill you. The outcomes of people cold turking off these drugs, I believe in many cases, is driving what we're seeing with the suicide rates across this country. Not just for veterans, but for all Americans.
Yeah, so this isn't just a veteran issue. No. This isn't a service member issue. This is this is an issue throughout all of America. Yes. Anybody can have a mental health. And it's funny when we talk to, when I do these podcasts and I talk to people, a lot of people think that, oh, this is just in the veteran community, or, oh, this only happens here. When anybody hears the words PTS or PTSD, right, immediately they think military. And that is not the case. It's the same way for everyday average American Joes.
By the numbers, there are far more Americans across the board, civilians with traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress than veterans, by a long shot.
Yes.
Car accidents, individual family trauma, bicycle accidents, all kinds of things, slip and falls in the ice.
And so that was a campaign a while ago about the stigma of post-traumatic stress and how people perceive when they hear it. It was a big campaign to say, hey, rape victims, murder, people who've been murdered or witness murderings, there's so many different areas where PTSD can evolve. It's not just a military issue. And I think that we've done a good job in making that clear throughout of America. And now, since we get this drug problem going, we definitely got to raise the voice for that. Yeah. So what other things are we doing to raise the voice on this issue?
Well, last month, the Gruntstyle Foundation, in partnership with the VFW nationally, along with the Disabled American Veterans, we held a series of events. We held a film screening of the film Medicating Normal. If anybody's listening, this film is an absolute must-watch, especially if you're on medication or for anybody, because at this point, I'm pretty sure where the data shows today is pretty much every family has been impacted by this issue across the board. Just the prescription rates, I believe it's close to 20% of women in this country are prescribed an antidepressant. When you start looking at veterans, prescription rates for veterans under VA care, 7 in 10 vets are prescribed a psychiatric drug. So the prescription rates are just off the charts.
Veterans, don't leave benefits on the battlefield. VetServe delivers intel, firepower, and follow-through from VA mortgage loans and real estate to financial services and disability. Deploy to vetserve.us.
Yeah, so we held this series of events in D.C. So we held this film screening of Medicating Normal, which features 2 veterans, combat vets. We also held a press conference with Congressman Jack Bergman of Michigan's 1st Congressional District. We had the fortune of having Congressman Tom Barrett. He was there with us as well. He was actually supposed to speak, but a couple of the other families that we had, all the families, they needed the time that they needed to talk about the loss of their sons.
Yeah, of course.
And we were not going to take that from them. So Congressman Barrett, unfortunately, wasn't able to speak, but he planned to. And so we had the press conference in the morning and then a half-day summit inside of the U.S. Capitol complex, sponsored by the chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, Jerry Moran. And we had global experts. Dr. Peter Gertje flew in from Denmark, from Copenhagen, probably one of the top 2 or 3 global experts on this issue of psychiatric drugs and harm.
What amazed me during that was the doctor that came up and spoke about his son.
Yeah,
who
Larry
served.
Miller. Yeah.
I mean, for a doctor to come out and say that he was part of the problem and he didn't realize it just shows you that this doesn't just happen on this level or this level. It happens on every single level.
I asked Larry, at what point did his position change, or what was a turning point for him with a lot of these medications? And for him specifically, it was selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, antidepressants. And he said it was after his son, Mark, had a suicide attempt in 2007. It was at that time he'd been prescribed antidepressant or SSRI. And that was the moment that Larry started looking at this differently. And Larry is an emergency medicine doctor, educated at the University of Michigan. So he's in Texas, but he's a Michigan guy as well. It was that it took his son attempting to take his own life in 2007 that got him to start opening his eyes and looking at this differently. And now you can't once you see this, you cannot unsee it. Well,
that's a good thing, though.
It's a great thing, but unfortunately for many, it takes so much to get them there.
Right, and and during that video I was watching, the gentleman from Gruntstyle, he came up and he talked, and he was talking about sending up the flare. There's been 12 to 15 guys throughout the United States that walk into a VA and kill themselves in the VA to show, hey, I didn't get the help I needed.
And that's what Larry's son Mark ultimately did at the San Antonio VA less than 3 months ago.
And, when it sends chills down your body when you hear that that's happening to some of our guys. But the better question is how many Americans have done that same thing in hospitals across the United States because of these same issues? I bet you that number is greatly higher than that. But it's sad that, this is the part that gets attention. The other ones don't.
We're not seeing the violence. We're missing the violence in a lot of this. I have a friend who took the life of his own 3-year-old son, adopted son. And when he got to prison psychiatrist asked him what medications you're on, and he started rattling off this laundry list of drugs. And her response is, a VA doctor wouldn't do that. And then the prison psychiatrist started looking down the medical records, and sure enough, benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, antidepressants, probably stimulant, just an absolute total nightmare drug cocktail. And she advised him to get a forensic psychiatrist and an attorney, and he did, and he ended up getting out about a year and a half later. But this isn't being talked about in the way that we need it to be. These suicides at the VA facilities, I think, is your point, is just one data point in this larger epidemic that's been going on. And I believe that a lot of those suicides are from vets who were cold turkeyed off of their medications, ran out of their medications, went to the VA, got turned away.
Because you're a pill popper, or you're sourcing pills or whatever they call it.
Or they just don't even have time to see them. And because of the huge burden that the VA is under, they're just drowning. They've got so many patients that come in, especially the past couple of years, and they're just drowning in patients and keep up with it. And sorry, we can't see you today. And off the vet goes, actively going through psychiatric drug withdrawal. And so, circling back, what we're doing is we've been holding these series of summits from across the country. We held our first one in Eaton Rapids, Michigan, at the VFW National Home in October of last year. We have families who lost loved ones, individual veterans who've gone through this experience like you and I have described, experts coming in and showing us the data, showing us, hey, this is what's going on, and holding these conversations across the country to draw attention to this. And when you put somebody in a room for half a day and they hear these conversations and hear these stories from these family members and these veterans and their lived experience of what they went through, you can't unsee it and you can't unhear it. And our goals are, and this is for Gruntstyle Foundation, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and I think so many other organizations out there, our calls to action are not extreme. They are simpler, smarter, safer prescribing practices and more education for patients and for doctors. And so signatory informed consent or written consent being one of them, retraining for the mental health and prescribing workforce so they understand what's actually going on. And when they see an Eric or a Derek going through their office and they see them having a panic attack or manic episode or a psychotic episode, they see a side effect of a drug instead of schizophrenia or bipolar.
Yes.
And so that's what we're calling for. Retrainings, greater informed consent, reform deprescribing guidelines we talked about. Right now, they're just cold turkeying people effectively with 2-week tapers, when many people need a year or years to get off of some of these drugs. And for some people, the withdrawal is so bad that they just can't. And they just stay on them permanently in some cases.
So what makes you think that, why that happens? These 2-week tapers, mm-hmm. right? Is it, pharmaceutical companies that put out, you could, taper off this in 2 weeks? Or is it, where does the bureaucracy lie in these tapering, manual procedures, standard operational procedures, and why is that so hard to change?
You ask a very simple question, and it's a very simple answer, but it's an answer people don't like to hear, is corruption. And there's no other way of having this conversation without talking about the $3 billion criminal settlement the U.S. Department of Justice had with GlaxoSmithKline, because they did a study on kids, Paxil, where they'd hired a researcher out of Brown University to conduct the study, then hired a marketing firm to write the study. The marketing firm never saw the raw trial data. And by the way, this is industry practice. Mm-hmm. This is not just GSK. Marketing firm never saw the raw trial data. And so in the study, when they published it, it read as though drug works far greater than placebo, and no major adverse events were reported. When in fact, the U.S. government believed that, let me rephrase, the U.S. government found that there had been completed suicides in the trial, and the drug worked to the same level of placebo. You can't have this conversation without talking about the $2.2 billion criminal fine and settlement against Pfizer. I think $1.3 billion of it was criminal, the largest criminal settlement in U.S. history. Johnson & Johnson, another $2 billion, down the list. And so when we're talking about this, and everybody thinks the term corruption is like, I want Eric to host me on his radio show, and I'm going to give Eric $1,000 to hook me up. That's not what it is. It's a pervasive, deliberate, and long-term, I think, infestation of our establishment in a way that doesn't feel like it's just this transactional thing. It's, hey, I'm going to hire this doctor researcher out of the University of Michigan. I'm going to contract them to be on my speaker series for Pfizer to talk about their expertise and how they feel that this treatment works so far better than the other one. And then you do that. And then you hire an influencer to go online and talk about how my Zoloft worked so much better for me today. And without it, I could not survive. And thank God for my Zoloft. And you see the sad cloud commercials that you saw on TV. Mm-hmm. Those ads aren't just buying eyeballs. What they're doing is that they're buying influence over the media establishment. So it's like, it's not just one thing. What's happening to result in why we have recommendations of a 2-week taper or 50% reductions over the course of a month or a couple weeks. There was no science behind that. There was no studies to look at what is a safe way to deprescribe people from this. There's a study that just came out a week ago out of the UK that's got the harm community and the expert community that's working on this just in outrage, because they did a study on antidepressant withdrawal, but they looked at people who had only been on the drugs for 8 to 12 weeks. How many people do you know that was on an SSRI for 8 to 12 weeks?
I know a lot of people that are on it way longer than that. Years. And decades. So if they're going to do a study,
you need to be looking at the long-term withdrawal effects.
And what happens after those people that have been on them for so long.
Yes. And so what we're having is we're having things like that come out that makes us question even those that are coming out like me and saying, I was trapped on Zoloft for a year. It made me feel like I was eating gunpowder. It made me believe that the drug industry had a hit on my life. It made me tell my parents to give me their phones so I could lock our phones in a separate vehicle so I could tell them that we were all in danger. Like this absurd stuff. Like we all deserve far better than this.
Well,
everyone does.
Yeah, in America, everybody does. I mean, we're the land of the free.
Yeah.
But they're starting to take advantage of everybody.
Yeah. Yep. And so here we are with this crisis, and a lot of people sitting on their hands and saying, oh, well, we need to study this more. Well, they did the studies, and the studies that the drug companies even presented the FDA to get many of these drugs through to market, Prozac, Zoloft, Celexa, down the list. If you were to guess, how long do you think those studies needed to be for the FDA to say, okay, this drug is safe and effective? How long do you think that the Pfizer did their study on Zoloft that they had to present to the FDA?
I can tell you it's probably not as long. So right now, House Bill 118 for hyperbaric oxygen and chamber treatment, they required a 5-year study.
Okay.
Right now, we're in year 2.
Okay.
We have 3 more years of this study before the VA or the government will even consider giving HBOT treatment for traumatic brain injury. But I would guess that for these drugs...
With that in mind, Guess, yeah.
I would guess that it is maybe a tenth of the time.
So give me a months, years?
Maybe 6 months.
Okay. 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
They didn't submit 2 6-week trials. They could have done 20 different trials, and they just happen to have 2 that happen to show some level of efficacy. And the entire debate and the entire committee, these committee hearings, when they were debating these drugs, whether they should approve them or not, the entire debate was about efficacy. The doctors on the panel at the FDA, their entire debate, they couldn't agree the drug worked. If you read the entire transcripts, in which I have, and this is all I do, so I've read all this stuff, you stare at this and you're just like, what in the hell is going on? And then you watch, you read, and the one of the FDA directors comes in and tells them that it's not their job to deny, it's their job to approve if they can find any level of benefit. And so off the market Zoloft goes.
So why do you think, so you have the least invasive treatment where you sit in a tube with 100% oxygen twice a day, 5 days a week for a whole month. Mm-hmm. Right? And it did the most improvement on my brain housing group in the way I thought, made me feel better. I mean, it was a night and day difference in a month. Mm-hmm. And it's the government tells us, you got to do a 5-year study before we'll even consider to give this to veterans or anybody else for TBI. Mm-hmm. But if you're prescribing a pill, let's do it in 6 weeks. You know how absurd that sounds, right? You know, it's something that's completely healthy, that doesn't cause you withdrawals, that does so much good, they're going to require 5-year studies. But something that would require all of these things that you're talking about, they're like, let's do it in 6 weeks and push it out to market. And
money drives everything, man. And so that's what we're dealing with. We are dealing with corruption from 50 years ago. Because almost all the panel members on the FDA, it's called the Psychopharmacological Drug Advisory Committee, or PDAC committee, almost all of them are taking money from the drug companies.
Oh, of course.
Speaker fees.
I'm sure. And when you talk about some of these,
consulting fees.
Yeah, well, I mean, even our politicians, too, they come in, they become a state senator or a congressman, they might be worth $400,000 at that time. Fast forward 2 to 3 years, they're worth 15, 16 million. And it's sad to say that, but there are them out there that are, advocates for these pharmaceutical companies.
Yep. Well, at this point with some of these, again, where I believe is, I don't believe that everybody's a monster. Because when I first started working on this, and I came down this path because I went through my withdrawal, and when I was going through my year-long withdrawal, I started studying this. And I started reading books, and I came across a book called Mad in America by Robert Whitaker, and then another one he'd written called Anatomy of an Epidemic, where he details how these drugs came to market, the whole shtick, all of it, but the whole background of these drugs, and the role in suicides, and the role in attempts, and the role in disability rates.
Well, so now you talk about disability ratings. That brings down
a whole other path, but that's where I really started to understand how big of a problem this was. But as I first started advocating, I was just angry all the time. And I'm at a point now where I'm not marching around just angry and pissed everywhere I go. But I've also stopped seeing the world as all monsters. And I used to look at a lot of these doctors and almost all psychiatrists as just monsters, thinking that they knew what they were doing, mm-hmm. Knew that what they did to me and what they did to so many of my friends. And what I've come to the conclusion is that they're just as much a victim as anybody else in this. Imagine being a doctor or a psychiatrist who is thinking that you're helping someone every day, and you've got 15 patients that come through your office every day or more, and mm-hmm. You've been doing this for decades. And now you start to learn persistent, for some permanent sexual dysfunction. You start learning about the side effects. Start really understanding what mania can be caused by these meds, or psychosis can be caused by some of these meds. Realizing how many people did you give a bipolar or schizophrenia diagnosis to, who pushed them down a path of a dozen drug cocktail? Imagine having to try to go to sleep at night.
Yeah, I
hurt for these people because like they don't go into medicine because they wanted to harm people. Like you didn't go into the military because you just wanted to hurt people. You went into the military because you want to serve your country. You want to do the right thing. You want to be noble. And I believe that almost all these doctors out there are the same, and they just got the same bad information. The doctor that wanted to prescribe me an antidepressant a month ago at the VA clinic, she truly looked at me as though she'd never heard of antidepressant withdrawal before. And she didn't because it's not in her medical school literature. They don't train them on this at all.
See, now that, talking about better training, and I think back to back in my advocacy when I was a mentor for a lot of veterans from St. Louis to Michigan to Texas to Pennsylvania, and my guys would commit suicide, and I would feel responsible like I didn't do enough. And, when we start finding out all these issues, I'm thinking to myself, maybe it wasn't me.
You didn't know.
I didn't, I knew that they were on all these medications. I mean, they would come to these 7-day transitional programs and, we all live in like this, house. Mm-hmm. And every morning they'd be unzipping their bags and, they'd have a selection of medications.
Looks like a pharmacy.
And back then, to me, because I was on the same thing, I was like, oh, that's normal. We're all on the same stuff.
And there you are going out, in many cases, going out at the bar and drinking at night together.
Yeah.
Not knowing how dangerous alcohol interacts with these drugs.
Yeah. No. And then when they, bite that bullet or they hang themselves in a hotel, or I had one guy, Scott was his name. He went back to the hotel room that he left out of boot camp, and he hung himself in that same room. And then we had to go to his funeral. And I tell you, I felt so responsible back then, thinking, what could I have done differently? And unfortunately, I spent 10 years, I still kind of feel responsible. But as I'm starting to find out some of these new problems that we're having with overprescribing and just some of the help that isn't there that should be, things that could help that they won't provide, it's starting to lessen a little bit because, but that information back then wasn't even available.
Yeah. And I think we're at a turning point in this country and as a community. A year and a half ago, because I've been fighting on this since 2018. When I was finishing up my withdrawal, I was already starting to advocate on this. And so 7 years. And then you added another 3 or 4 years of the drug cocktail, your withdrawal. I'm at like 11 years in this, right? And it's taken its toll. But when I first went at this in 2018, 2019, I went down to Washington, D.C. in I think the spring of 19. I was treated like a malingerer. I was treated like all but a conspiracy theorist. I was making this up. Today, I can't have a conversation with a group of people without everybody in the room just saying, that happened to my sister. Or like, hey, I'm on these medications, and like now I know exactly what you're talking about. Like this, I'm living this right now, and so I think we're at a point of similar to the opiate epidemic. Critical mass of victims is I think where we're at. We got, like I said, 7 in 10 vets under VA care on a psychiatric drug, 30% on antidepressants. Women in this country, it's close to 20% of all women in the United States are on a antidepressant or psychiatric drug. General population is 12 to 13%. So like you start having a critical mass of harm, but you also are now finding that people are becoming more aware, because these conversations have been happening. And so when we're talking about veteran suicide in Washington, D.C. today, this conversation's coming up, and people are taking it serious. And there's actually a member of Congress right now getting ready to introduce a bill on signatory informed consent for the VA in Congress, and they'll be introducing that bill in the next month. And
Good.
So, yeah. And so like here we are, the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency.
Yep. Mr. Love, he runs that right now. Yep, and he's a pretty good cat.
Yep.
And I'm hoping that he's taking these calls to action to heart and deciding to do something about it. And I hope our government is too.
They are. That is what is the most thing that is just. It took me a long time to accept it, but the state of Michigan, the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency, is on board with this conversation, is supporting it, facilitating it, helping to drive it. They sponsored our summit and the harm reduction summit that we hosted at the VFW National Home. They actually put money behind that.
Good.
I don't think there's another state in the country that's put money behind this issue. And here we are in a state where we actually have government wanting to help and lean into this. And I'm still in awe that we have that type of support, because it takes some bravery.
6 years.
Yeah, but it takes some bravery for people to stick their heads out above the berm, you know?
Oh, yeah. And I'm thankful for those people.
Oh, yeah.
Somehow we need to make a lot more noise so more people do the same thing.
Exactly.
And so what do we have coming up into the future? Besides that House bill that's coming up, is there anything that, you can think of that we can help raising our voices about here in the future to create a bigger audience, create a bigger yell, a call to action? Mm-hmm. I mean, what can we do?
I think in the short term right now, what we have coming up is we're working with the Lansing Area Veterans Coalition, folks at the MVA, veteran service organizations, many members of the Commanders Group, the Michigan Commanders Group. We're looking at hosting a couple of events, one a film screening of Medicating Normal, also looking at doing continuing education credits for counselors and clinicians on this issue of what's called akathisia. Mm-hmm. You know it, but it's what can be the acute withdrawal or adverse drug event to some of these medications, antidepressants, antipsychotics, benzodiazepines. It feels like it can feel like you have bugs crawling underneath your skin. The bolts of lightning thing that we talked about earlier, striking us in the head. All these crazy, bizarre side effects that ultimately many people take their lives just to make them stop. So continue education training on that.
So how does that evolve? So Michigan, we have the peer-to-peer support specialist initiative, that started. I know I went through the whole course back, over a decade ago, to be able to help, all people, just with mental health stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe some of those continuing credits can go to some of our Michigan peer-to-peer support specialists that are out there. That's a vital role.
Train in this.
In between.
Like we can't. Today, I don't believe we can, with a straight face, provide suicide prevention training without having some prompts of questions to ask. Someone calls your friend and says, "Hey, I'm thinking about hurting myself." One of the questions that should be asked is, "Are you on a medication, or have you been taking your medication as prescribed?" Super simple, but if someone stopped taking their antidepressant a week earlier and just cold turkeyed themselves off of their drug, their brain can be telling them, "Hey, you got to hurt yourself." Mm-hmm. And if we're not asking that question, another dose could make that issue go away instantly, just by resuming the medication regimen that they had been on and then going to see their doctor and telling them they're having these adverse events. And so I think where we're at is I think we need everybody across the state calling their members of Congress, calling their state representatives, calling the governor's office, saying we need reform now. We need safer prescribing practices. And again, this is not about stopping prescribing. This is about safer and smarter prescribing for everyone and more information for patients and doctors.
So is there a place that an average human being, an American, a veteran, a service member who are on a lot of medications, is there a place, a website that they can go and do some studying themselves? Like, I know there's got to be some where you can, put in your list of medications and then it will generate, what could be happening.
There's several of them. One of them, I want to point to my friend Angela Peacock. She's actually featured in the film Medicating Normal, and she's one of the global experts on this now. I'd like to point to her for sure. So if you just search Angela Peacock or A Peacock Consulting, you'll find her. You can also go to the Gruntstyle Foundation, so gruntstylefoundation.org on our website, and then /War Cry for Change. You can find us there. But madinamerica.com is a really great resource, and they'll actually point you to other things out there as well.
Okay.
And so Mad in America is that organization that Robert Whitaker, the author, helped to build. after he had the huge success with his first book of the same name, because he found that people just kept on coming to him like saying, hey, where do I go? Like, what do I do? Like, I've read your book, now I know, but like, what are the next steps? And where do I refer my son or my daughter or my spouse to help answer these questions of, hey, is this side effect possibly the result of or being caused by a medication? It's just basic information is what we're looking for, and you can find it in those places. So
why do you think that the VA doesn't have that on the VA website where you can, search up and do every time you get a medication from the VA, they send it to you in a package, comes with about 10 pages of stuff, right? And I think they're expecting that individual.
At which point you've been prescribed a psychiatric drug, at which point you are now a psychiatric patient.
Right.
And who is now being told, hey, you need to read this document so you understand. I'm not sure many can.
Yeah, well, and that it's understandable because it's written by, pharmaceutical companies and people are out there. There's big, huge terminology words in there that I know when I've read through a couple, I didn't understand hardly any of it.
All does this word mean?
Yeah, and so, it got to a point where, this piece, here comes 10 pages of information on this medication that I don't understand. We just throw it away.
Yeah.
And, and I'm sure like probably 80 to 90% of people do that.
Yeah.
They don't sit there and read through the 10 pages that's tiny and small with those big, huge words they don't understand. And, for sure, seeing a doctor maybe once every couple of months, once every 6 months, just depending on what they feel your need is. They're not going in and asking, hey, what is this doing? So you get prescribed a drug and 2 weeks later, you don't go back and maybe a month later you'll go back and they'll say, how is it going? Oh, you don't really, it's not really doing too much. Well, let me give you a higher dose. Mm-hmm. Right. And then that higher dose becomes another higher dose. And hence here comes the epidemic that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And so we definitely got to fix that here in America.
And what we will do is we fix this here in this country. This epidemic was caused in this country, and it has spiderwebbed out. It started with Western Europe, and it's made its way east. And so now this is a global epidemic that we're now dealing with. But where we're at today is, like I said, I think we're at a point where reform is coming, and it's coming quickly. You asked about why doesn't the VA just put this on their website? I've been meeting with the VA mental health leadership for the past year and a half. They actually join our Michigan Governor's Challenge meetings every month to be part of those conversations. And a lot of it, like we talked about earlier, where I decided, they're not all monsters. Mm-hmm. They're not all monsters. They just don't understand, just like so many others, even the doctors and the researchers and the experts. Because in order to accept this, to swallow this pill, you have to accept that the medical training you were provided, in some cases was corrupted. The textbooks that you read, it was deliberate omission, so why the stuff was not in there. But I think where we're at today is that I think we'll probably see that in the next year.
I hope so.
I know VA Secretary Collins is looking at this issue. I know that Secretary Kennedy is looking at this issue along with the rest of the HHS. One of the heads of the Surgeon General's office actually spoke at our conference in D.C. I had the opportunity to meet the former acting director of the FDA in Washington about 2 months ago. And as we were talking, we're in tears and we're high-fiving each other.
Okay.
A moment that I never thought I'd ever experienced in all of my life was I was high-fiving with the former acting director of the FDA before Dr. Macri was confirmed by the Senate and appointed by the president, because she was telling me how committed they are to this problem.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, and so, but I think we're going to see some of these reforms coming, but I think it's a matter of, like you said, making sure people are aware, stirring up information about this, and for those who are here in the state, reach out to your local veterans organization, because almost all the veterans organizations in Michigan, VFW, DAV, down the list, this is a priority of theirs.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you want to know where you can be part of that fight, come out to your local veteran service organization, VFW, like I said, DAV, Legion, down the list. We need everybody we can in this fight to make sure that we get the reform done that we need. So
that's great. So any saved rounds before we take off this?
No, I think the biggest thing is, like we talked about earlier, just don't stop taking your meds. If you hear anything that you had a question about or you were alarmed by, don't just stop taking your meds. Go talk to your doctor first. Have a plan. Do it slow. If they say 50% reductions over the course of a month and you've been on these drugs for a year or 2 years or 5 years, I would seek a new doctor, and I would go as slow or as safer if you decide that you want to discontinue some of your treatments. But I'm not a doctor, so you have to talk to your doctor. Be smart about this, and for those who are struggling, just know it does get better.
And what was that website that they could go to, Gruntstyle?
You got a couple of them. So you got gruntstylefoundation.org /war cry for change. You've also got Angela Peacock, apeacockconsulting.com. And then you also have Mad in America. And Mad in America has got a robust set of literature, whether it's got by the drug, side effects, tapering, personal stories, which I think are the most helpful of what people have gone through themselves. So,
well, I recommend anybody who's on a lot of medications just to go to those locations, those websites, and just start playing around and see what you find out about the medications you're on. And you might find out some very disturbing things that you want to go talk to your doctor about, and it might fuel a fire under these people to make them do that. Also, you can go to warfightersunited.com. Everything that we talk about on this podcast will be posted on there. We'll have hyperlinks just like he was talking about. Or you can follow us at Warfighters United Podcast on Facebook. And if you guys have any questions, you can always email me at warfightersunitedpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.